Maybe you're approaching the final stages of your PhD journey and you're working on your discussion chapter, but you keep thinking, am I getting this wrong? One of the strangest things about qualitative research is that very often, the closer you get towards the end of it, the less certain you feel. And that can be kind of unsettling because you think, well, surely I should know my thesis by now. Surely I should feel good about what I'm saying. I should be confident in my argument. I should know what my contribution is. Surely it shouldn't feel this difficult. Someone in my PhD community, Momentum, recently described the final stages of the PhD when you're trying to pull everything together like plaiting fog. And I thought that was brilliant. That is possibly the most accurate description of the closing stages of the PhD journey that I've ever heard. You're trying to weave it all together, but it just keeps slipping through your fingers. You can spend months reading, writing, rewriting, restructuring, editing. You're just thinking about your thesis all day long. And the harder you try, the more you think about it, the more you get into it, the more confusing and overwhelming it feels. And when somebody asks you what your PhD is about, you're like, it's complicated. How long have you got? In this video, we're going to talk about what's actually going on here. But before we do, if you recognise yourself in any of the things that I've said so far, you are probably going to find my PhD survival guide for the discussion and writing up particularly helpful. Because one of the biggest problems that PhD students face at this point in the journey is they lose sight of the bigger picture. They can't see the wood for the trees. They get caught in the weeds. Maybe you've got disconnected chapters, half-finished arguments, and what feels like hundreds of pieces of your thesis just kind of floating around, and it feels impossible to bring all of this together. I'll link to it on screen right now, and I'll also put a link in the description for later. Let's get into the video. I think one of the biggest problems with a qualitative PhD is that a lot of your progress is invisible. And this creates a really weird psychological experience. You can work for weeks and weeks or months and months and still feel like it's really not coming together. Progress doesn't always look obvious, and it's not just about the number of words you've got on the page. Progress might mean suddenly understanding something clearly that you didn't understand before. It might mean realising that a particular theory or a particular body of literature isn't relevant to the research that you're doing. It might mean looking at a couple of themes that you've developed through your analysis and realising that they're connected or they're actually the same thing. It might be understanding why you've got stuck, and that's because the research that you've ended up doing and the things you've ended up finding aren't what you originally set out to do. And there's been a disconnect between those two things, and you finally realised that's why you're stuck, because this bit doesn't match this bit. And it's like, oh, thank goodness for that. These things can be quite difficult to measure. And sometimes you only realise that they've happened when you're looking back. This uncertainty, particularly towards the end of the PhD journey, can become really exhausting, because this is the point at which you're trying to make everything make sense simultaneously. You're holding an awful lot of stuff in your mind at the same time. Your literature review, your theoretical framework, your findings, your contribution, your structure, your interpretation. That's a lot. This is where a lot of people tell themselves they must have gone wrong somewhere, because it still feels messy in my head. It shouldn't feel messy in my head at this point. It should be clear. And I just want to jump in and say, if it still feels messy and unclear, even though you're getting close to the end, that is completely normal. Because there's a lot going on. You're trying to pull your entire thesis together. So try asking yourself smaller questions at this point in time. Like, what feels important here? Or what keeps coming up again and again? Those smaller interpretive questions are going to be what gradually leads you towards your larger overall argument. You don't usually figure out your entire PhD discussion chapter in one breakthrough moment. Coherence develops gradually, and very often it develops backwards, retrospectively. Quick question for you. How does your PhD currently feel? Messy but moving, busy but directionless, emotionally heavy, hard to explain to other people, like you're constantly doubting yourself, or something different altogether? Get into the comments and let me know, because I'm sure there are other people watching this video who feel exactly the same way as you. I also think the closing stages of a qualitative PhD can feel emotionally very heavy because the nature of the work you're doing takes on a bit of a personal edge. The earlier stages can feel a lot more procedural. Read the literature, conduct interviews, analyse the data, build your codes, build your themes. And these are those kind of tick-offable tasks. You can go, right, I've completed this, now I know what's coming next. I'm going to get on to this thing next. But the discussion chapter can feel a little bit slippery. Where does it begin? Where does it end? It changes the emotional nature of the work that you're doing. Because now you're interpreting, you're deciding what matters, you're deciding what connects. You've got to make your mark here and identify what contribution your research is making. And that can feel incredibly exposing because that kind of interpretation requires judgment. It requires you to make judgments. And more importantly, it requires you to have confidence in the judgments you're making. And that might lead you to believe that feeling uncertain is a bad thing because it gets in the way of those judgments and that confidence. One important thing to learn at this stage in your PhD journey is that uncertainty and a contribution to knowledge can coexist. Qualitative research often becomes more intellectually complex the deeper you get into it. And the deeper you get into it, the more uncertainty is going to emerge. You start seeing contradictions, ambiguities, limitations, competing interpretations. That kind of thing isn't a sign that anything's really going wrong here. It's a sign that your thinking is becoming more sophisticated. And one thing that can be really helpful to do here is to change the standard that you're using to judge your research. Instead of asking, do I feel completely certain? Try asking this instead. Can I explain my reasoning clearly? Can I explain how I got here? Those are much more useful questions, especially in qualitative research. I think another reason why a lot of the late stage qualitative PhD work feels so difficult is because so much of it happens in private. You are mostly on your own with your thoughts and your drafts and your existential crises. A lot of people in the later stages start to assume that everyone else is just coping better than they are. Meanwhile, everybody else is sitting there thinking exactly the same thing. I don't know if this argument works. I don't know if my analysis is good enough. I don't know if my themes are right, if this is correct. I feel like I'm doing this wrong. I feel like I'm behind where I should be. And another thing that we can add into the mix here is there isn't a really clear line that you can draw to say, I'm absolutely finished now. I am ready to submit this now. The work can become infinite. There's always more that you can be doing. And those two things, the comparison and the feeling of endlessness, can get into this very toxic cycle and you can just go around in circles for rather a long time. A useful thing to adopt here is a phrase consisting of two words, and those two words are good enough. Your PhD thesis does not have to be perfect. It needs to be good enough to submit, good enough to examine, good enough to meet the doctoral standard. That is so much more attainable than perfection. And without this kind of standard, without this kind of benchmark, this thing to aim for, you will just restructure and rewrite and edit over and over and over again. There are some signs that you can look out for that indicate that your thesis is good enough to be examined. Things like conceptual clarity, stronger connections between chapters, clearer explanations, more focused claims, improved understanding of your own argument. For example, maybe 3 months ago, your discussion chapter was basically saying participants experienced uncertainty in their professional identity. And that is fine as a starting point. But now, after spending some more time sitting with your analysis, reading around and writing, you realise that your thesis is actually saying something much more specific than that. You realise the uncertainty is connected to status, legitimacy, and the emotional pressure to appear professionally successful, even after leaving a prestigious career. That is conceptual development. That is movement towards that standard of good enough. Or maybe your writing has shifted from making huge, vague claims like this research changes how we understand identity towards something much more precise and defensible, like this research suggests professional identity remains emotionally significant long after career transitions occur. That is much stronger. These things matter because they demonstrate a much deeper understanding of what your research is actually doing. And these are exactly the kind of things that your examiner is going to be looking for, because they are exactly the kind of things that I looked for when I was examining PhD theses. If you do want more structured support with this, this is exactly what I walk you through in my Discussion and Writing Up PhD Survival Guide. So do go and take a look at that. The link is in the description.